Nästa talare har börsnoterat flera läkemedelsföretag på den amerikanska börsen och är idag arbetande styrelseordförande i medicinteknikbolaget IRRAS. Så välkommen upp på scen säger jag till Kleanthis Xanthopoulos.
Thank you. This one, thank you. Well, Michael, that's the first time I heard the Greek crisis made somebody very happy, so I'll make sure I'll take that back to the homeland. I'm very pleased to be here once again and be able to talk about IRRAS and what I think has been a substantial progress since the last time I met many of you. And I'd like to share that progress with you, starting by telling you what the what is it that we're focusing on? Basically, we're trying to address a huge unmet medical need in the area of stroke. That's a huge medical problem. Stroke comes in two forms. Both of them are devastating for the patient. We specifically focus on the so-called hemorrhagic stroke. And what you see up there is the definition of hemorrhagic stroke is when one of your vessels in your brain ruptures and you have bleeding into your brain. That results in some very significant results such as disability, dementia, and death. Now, what is even more important is 1 in 18 deaths is really the result of a stroke. And although hemorrhagic stroke is only about 15 to 20% of the total strokes, and those amount to about 2 million in the industrial world, it amounts for 40% of the deaths because bleeding in the brain disturbs not only the balance and also, of course, the intracranial pressure, but results in an immediate death of a number of neurons that eventually have devastating effects on the patient. So what we're looking at is a big market, a big unmet medical need, and no solution in sight. And this is exactly what we think IRRAS is providing. What we have done is developed basically a computerized pump that controls the way we are addressing the problem of evacuating that hematoma. And we're doing this through some sophisticated software that is embedded in the hardware that you see here on the picture, and have now introduced that product in the EU. So we're a commercial stage company that is focusing on expanding the sales in the EU and now looking westwards in United States, try to get an FDA approval, a plan that we have set in place about a year ago and hopefully will execute this year. So we're a small company and a tiny company with very big ambitions, as you can see from that. We're in 2 continents, 5 different time zones, and at least 4 different countries. But we have developed a very large network of both people that we, consultants in the medical field, neurosurgeons that we think are the key opinion leaders that have really bought into the idea of the solution that we provide, and importantly have built in-house departments in engineering, sales, marketing, and regulatory. And for those of you who I have spoken to about a year ago, you remember that one of the key objectives were to transfer the technology that was developed here in Sweden, and that was an amazing accomplishment, but now turn it into the United States and industrialize that. Went from a research to a really development and manufacture entity, and I'm very happy to report that that's exactly what has happened. We've had now the version of 2.0 IRRAflow in the EU in a soft launch, and I will discuss with you later on where we stand. Some very exciting news. So basically, let me describe the problem with you and how our solution works. So the hemorrhagic stroke is a multi-billion-dollar market. It's addressed basically with innovations that happened 2-3 decades ago. So really, it's an area that is screaming for entry of a new innovative technology. And that's exactly what we think we are addressing. It's also a market that is increasing, partially because of the expanded lifespan of the developed nations. The incidence of stroke is increasing, and therefore our market increases proportionally. So we have the ability through this particular device to constantly monitor the intracranial pressure, and also through a bilumen system that frequently irrigates and aspirates, be able to remove that hematoma from the patient within the first 12 to 24 hours that are absolutely critical following the stroke. Let me show you how it works and also highlight why it's so much better than the existing standard of care that, as I said, has been established more than 2 or 3 decades ago. So typically what happens in the standard of care, the patient comes in a comatose way. The neurosurgeon will insert essentially a catheter and would allow gravity to try to evacuate that hematoma, because that needs to happen within the 24 hours. In fact, the sooner you do that, the better it will happen. The problem is that in most cases, frankly, anything between 30 and 50%, this original catheter will clot, right? Our solution is very simple, very elegant, and computerized. We provide, instead of a single catheter, a bilumen catheter, and that allows us to both irrigate and aspirate at frequencies that we control through the computer in the pump. In simple terms, we're looking at a very sophisticated plumbing solution to a very significant problem, right? So we pulse either an anticoagulant or ringer solution, and then we aspirate. We pulse and aspirate. So does that work, and what are the benefits? Let me share with you the cases that we're focusing on. These are basically the most significant subcategories of stroke. Typically, as you probably know, depending on the lateral portion of the brain that you have suffered the stroke, the exact opposite part of the body will be affected. So if you have a hematoma on your right side of the brain, your left side of your body will be affected. And as I said, we try very quickly to evacuate that. So these are clinical data. I'm going to show you 3 cases to highlight the differences of what is it that we're doing and what we're focusing on and what the results are. So here you're seeing an intraventricular hemorrhage. What you see there in white, that's actually blood that has bled into the brain. And what we've applied here is IRRAflow for 27 hours, and this is the result, essentially complete evacuation of the hematoma, no infection, no clotting, and a very critical and positive outcome for the patient who returned to rehab and a regular ward. Let me show you another case. This case is a subdural hematoma where you have bleeding on the side of the brain, and you can see there with the arrows, there's so much brain that the topography of the brain has been altered. What we have done here is treated the patient for less than 7 hours, and you see a complete removal of that brain clot. Lastly, and this is what we have been approved in Europe for a CE mark. Lastly, this is something that a lot of our key opinion leaders are seeing an opportunity to expand the market. And this is something have not been approved from regulatory authorities. So this is off-label use for something very obvious, which is a target of the company to get that product approved for these indications over the next 18 to 24 months. And that is to actually not only evacuate the clot, but also introduce medication. And so what you see here is an abscess in the brain. In lay terms, what that means is this is a patient who has a severe infection in the brain. He had gone through 2 different surgeries and was not able to remove that. Can I have a little bit of water, if possible? And you can see that treating that with 24 hours, we're able to remove that completely. So we're very pleased with the outcome of how that works, and essentially positioning the company and and the product to address a huge unmet medical need. Thank you very much, as I mentioned. Why? Because in Europe alone, we're seeing over 200,000 cases of hemorrhagic hematoma. Thank you. And very importantly is the pharmacoeconomic impact of these patients to the society. We're seeing on the disability-adjusted flight years, or so-called DALYs, a significant increase as in the, thank you. Got to show me where the restroom is if I'm going to drink all this. All right. In the last few slides, I want to talk about our commercial strategy, because obviously I can be here talking to you about how excited we are about the technology, but if, as we just heard from Michael, if you don't make money, you're just a dream, right? So it's good for entrepreneurial companies to show how we can eventually make money for the company and our shareholders. I have been personally very impressed with the work our German commercial team is doing, in that in our pre-launch, we have been talking to key opinion leaders in different countries. We've been talking to authorities in different countries, and we now have, this is already outdated since we introduced that to you a couple of weeks ago. We're now in 11 countries in Europe on the reimbursement code. And as you can see here, at a very significant prices. So the columns there indicate how much we expect to sell the control unit, but that's not where we're going to be making the money. The money is going to be made from the disposables, which you see on the very last column. We're looking at cost of goods to be very, very competitive, very significant margins. And we're looking at, as I said, globally a multi-billion-dollar market with a solution as a unique and only player that has this kind of a solution. So very, very pleased with the regulatory and the response that we've seen from key opinion leaders and authorities in different European countries. An important thing is, of course, to highlight what is it that we've accomplished since the last 9 months or so that we've discussed. So the very key for me was to take that concept out of a wonderful accomplishment we had here in Sweden, the obviously conceiving the concept and researching and developing it, but we transfer all that technology to the Bay Area in the US, in Northern California, to be able to industrialize the manufacturing, and that's what we have done, the result of cost of goods dropping for more than 50%. So that has happened. That 2.0 has now been introduced. That is what drives all the sales that I'm about to tell you. The second very important thing is building up our regulatory capabilities. We have been for the last year preparing to file an application in the US, and that's a so-called 510K application in front of the FDA. That is being applied next month. And we expect an approval in the second half of this year, which opens a completely new dimension to a new market in the US, which is equally competitive and big as the EU, and of course expansive capabilities for our company. So what are the commercial milestones? A lot of you are of course very interested to know, and so am I, so I'm happy to share that with you. We have already established the IRRAflow as being unique and premium product. Just to give you a sense of how good the reception has been in Germany so far, 161 neurosurgery centers exist in Germany. They satisfy more than 95% of all strokes. So these are the centers that receive more than 95% of stroke patients. All of these have been now contacted. They have seen the device. We have already, and this is, as I said, outdated by 2 weeks, we have over 70 now of these centers have pre-ordered the device and disposables. So frankly, I think our very aggressive goal of 5 million in sales for this year is now within our reach, and I'm very happy to say we're on track to do that and possibly even more. So I'm going to leave you with the last slide before we take any potential questions of what is it that we want to build. It's from an idea that came out of a brilliant neurosurgeon to funding it through entrepreneurial and risk capital in Sweden and United States. And where is it that we want to go? First and foremost is for us to continue to improve that product to satisfy a huge unmet medical need for the benefit of the patient. This, as I said, is a devastating disease, and we provide a very comprehensive and complete solution. Second, of course, is not to create value for the company, but in the process create value for our shareholders. And the plan that we have over the next 2 or 3 years, I was talking to an investor, and he was laughing that I identified a period of 24 months as a long-range goal, but that's as far as I can think. I get dizzy after 2 or 3 years. So in that time frame, we want to basically establish a track record of sales. We plan to grow with more than 100% year after year. We're going to open the US. But that very simple, sophisticated plumbing that I kind of reduced the whole concept to has applications outside of the brain, and that's something we want to build. Ultimately, a transformative company in a medical device that combines both mechanical and software issues to address some very significant unmet medical needs. So with that, I'll thank you for your attention, and if there is time, maybe we can take a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have to start ask, how is your Swedish? Do you understand Swedish?
Ja, min svenska är bra, men jag pratar inte så ofta. Så det.
Do you prefer the questions in Swedish or English?
Ja, det spelar ingen roll, men det är kanske bättre på grekiska.
Okay, so feel free, English or Swedish or
Yes.
Turkish.
Yeah, I'm sorry, maybe I didn't. It was.
Yeah.
So the question, why only subdural hematomas? Yes. The question, why only subdural hematomas? Maybe I didn't make that clear. We're not only subdural hematomas. We're basically on all hematomas, all 4 different categories. I think I spent a little more time on the slide on the subdural. That's why you were a little confused.
Okay, good. And then second question, are you, in your strategic positioning, planning to position this outside of neurosurgery centers, general clinics and private clinics?
No, for
maybe repeat the question,
I'm
please.
sorry.
Kleanthis, thank you.
The question was tactically and potentially strategically, do you plan to position the product outside of the neurosurgery centers? For the next couple of 3 years, we're going to be very busy on focusing on neurosurgery and not outside of those main hospitals. Eventually, as the technology develops, potentially, we want to see that it's critical that you intervene as quickly as possible. But to introduce the probe, you need essentially a neurosurgeon, right? So it is the vast majority is going to have to happen in neurosurgery centers.
Thank you.
There's a question there.
Använd gärna bara den här så att vi får, ja du vet. Ja men vad bra, då ska vi upprepa det nu frågan. Shoot!
Yeah.
It's very difficult to conduct a prospective randomized study, and there are so many confounding factors. You know that the timing of the intervention, the size of the bleeding, blah, blah, blah. It would be very difficult to convincingly show that this is better than something else and worse by investigating by the hospital.
Yeah, well, allow me to respectfully disagree, although the question is very, very good one, but I disagree with your conclusion. You notice I mentioned patient in our mission and in our ambitions of having better clinical outcomes. Let me give you a couple of reasons why I think it makes that very, very quote-unquote easy sell. The decision of now 73, essentially 48% of the neurosurgery centers that we contacted in Germany have committed in buying the device. The decision is not made by the neurosurgeon because the neurosurgeon has a new tool and it's fun to apply it. It's done in discussion and collaboration with the finance department. And it's that what makes us feel very, very comfortable about the penetration rate. Now, why? If you take the standard care, at least 30% of the cases, the single catheter that is put into the brain of the patient is going to clot. Okay, so now you have three potential issues. One, you don't know when it clotted because you don't have the nurse looking at the patient on an hourly basis, right? And that time that it's clotting, it's not draining, will be critical. Two, when you realize that it's clot, you have the following options. You open the system, and you're going to have to very carefully try to flush it, right? And that is mechanical, and you have to try to maintain an intracranial pressure that is constant. Otherwise, you might kill the patient. But you also risk by opening the system an infection, which is very common, and a brain infection can be detrimental. Even if you do that and you're successful, a quarter of these cases, about 10% overall, you won't be able to declot it, which means you have to take the patient back now to the operating room at a cost of $5,000 to $10,000 to change that catheter. Right? If I can demonstrate, which we have, that we don't clot, you don't have an open system, you have an alarm that immediately alerts the ICU center, and you have the outcomes that I showed you, it's a no-brainer. I don't. Correct. Having said that, I'm sure there will be retrospective studies, but we're not going to sponsor them. We're going to. Yeah.
Very well.
Okay. Any other questions?
So let me understand the first one and then elaborate on the second. The break-even point in terms of cost of goods, we're operating with over 75% margins.
I was referring to the installed base you believe that you need in order to turn over a break-even on only the
In Europe is about $2.5 million. Right? which we're on track to do 5 million this year. So we're going to have higher buffer than we need to worry about. And what I include in that picture, in that estimate, is of course not the cost of the consumable, because that's trivial. I'm talking about fully baked sales and marketing efforts. So salaries, fully baked on what we need to invest before we can turn it around. On your second question, the answer is a little complicated. So the FDA just changed the rules in December to encourage clinical data being part of the submission. It's not required, it's encouraged. By the time we do this in April, we're going to have at least several dozen additional clinical reports, not clinical studies, clinical reports that we're going to put if needed. So we're still very hopeful about the outcome of getting a very good discussion with the FDA and ultimately getting approved in the US. Clinical trials will be required as we grow to develop new applications for the device in the brain for delivery of, say, for instance, anti-tumor agents in the brain for glioma, which is something a lot of neurosurgeons have approached us for. That would be a prospective study, and that would be required, and it would be a PMA in the US, if you're familiar with the term. And so, yes, that's going to be a prospective study, but it's not part of our commercial numbers until 2019 anyway, and that's part of the planning. But for the 510K, we think it's not required, although we're going to include some clinical cases.
Kleanthis, let's just be clear. So with $5 million sales record, you are a profitable company, just to make clear for everybody here in the room. So it's just about how much you invest to grow that sales, right?
It's almost a direct relationship right now, and we haven't even touched. We're just starting discussions with Japan, Australia, and India.
Yeah.
These are completely untapped markets, not part of our projections. And so you talked about me giving a surprise, but you did disclose the surprise. So, so yes, part of our thinking is the company has matured so incredibly in the past year or so. So we are taking a very serious look of potentially listing the company in the First North Premier later this year. And as we grow and ambitions are grown as well, to potentially also entertain a dual listing in the US in 2018 or 2019.
And what's your thoughts about that? Is everything going according to plan?
Surprisingly, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, any more questions?
I have one more question, Kleanthis. Could you go back to the slide where you show your reimbursement levels? Because that's, yeah, back one more. Yeah, there. Can you comment on that? Because, you know, obtaining reimbursement levels on these healthy numbers, it's quite impressive. I mean, many companies have great gadgets, but not many companies do get reimbursements on this level. How is the strategy? How do you comment on that?
I would take zero credit for that. I want to point to an incredible teammate that is hiding behind the column there, our general manager for Europe, Matthias Mollman, who has had tremendous experience and success before with companies like Nevro and Kaifon. So I think based on the very good question that was asked, the pharmacoeconomic impact of introducing IRRAflow versus the standard of care, and the experience and the network that we have exceeded our expectations, right? Because those are high numbers, but they really make a lot of sense if you don't have to take the risk of an infection treating the patient or introducing the patient to the OR for an exchange. So just to give you an idea, some of you may be familiar with a company called Nevro. It's a medical device for a stimulant for back pain. They had a very similar strategy. They were approved in United States, in the EU, not in the US. They had about 25 million in sales in Europe before they moved to United States. They're today valued, they went public in the US in 2015, end of 2015. They valued about $2.8 billion on about 120 million US annual sales. They've got an excellent record of execution, and the market has rewarded them handsomely. So you're talking about 20 to 40 times revenue based on forward-looking. They're still struggling with reimbursement.
Yeah.
Right. So we have a very good start, and that's what makes us feel very very confident about the future outcomes.
Kleanthis Xanthopoulos, very interesting to listen to you. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.